Hello everyone who is joining me live. Hello everyone who I have just directed to the beginning of this video. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, it will become apparent over time. Now, let's talk about the Star Wars trailer. One of the things that's hard for me to describe is the method by which things are produced. It's the kind of thing that just kind of fits in my head and my eyes, the way that I perceive things. It becomes clear there's a certain stylistic design fundamental change, or the way that things are constructed, the way that things are edited, the way things are filmed. And most people who know films well enough know that there's basically three general lines of thought when it comes to cinematographic style and cinematography in general. And that tends to be best divvied up by, there's the old stuff, pre-60s, basically. There's the 60s to about mid-80s, early 90s, and then there's the modern era. And this pretty much, these three divvies are a pretty good way to explain cinematic style. And obviously modern movies try to go for older styles sometimes here and now, and not every old movie always fit the style, but it does generally fit for that. Now, it's hard to describe the difference, so I'm going to just describe it with how it's relevant to Star Wars. A New Hope especially, but also Empire and Return, were all done in that classical style, in part due to George Lucas being a huge movie geek and someone who was a huge fan of that overall style of approach. So, the way that the scenes are blocked, the way that the sound design is going through the scenes, and the way that I don't know how to describe this. The way I tried describing this to my sister, and she kind of got the point, so I'm going to assume this is the best descriptive capacity I have. They're less busy, okay? The so-called classical not composing style, the so-called classical cinematic style basically involves things being significantly less busy as far as what's going on the screen, how many things are in the screen, how much background there's going on, the way that they shape the background. There's a lot more, not so much empty space as there is negative space, done deliberately in order to try and emphasize whatever's going on in the foreground. There's a lot less random sounds, a lot less ambiance. There's a huge variance. The classical style, audio-wise, could be best described as this, because it's really quiet when it's quiet, and it's really loud when it's loud. And if you watch the original Star Wars trilogy, you'll see the original Star Wars trilogy pretty much has all this all the way along the way. Now, that being said, that leads us to the prequels. Now, the prequels were very clearly done in the modern style. Now, before anyone gets on me, I want to stress, I'm not saying the modern style is better or worse. I'm not saying the classical style is better or worse. I'm not saying the archaic style is better or worse. That's irrelevant. That's all preference, okay? The point is they are different. So the prequels were very clearly done in the more modern style, and which is a lot busier, a lot more noise, a lot more action going on in the background, a lot more general activity, and pretty much the opposite of that, right? You know, very very modern style. The trailer so far shows me. I'm not even going to say if I like it or not, because that's irrelevant. You can decide for yourself if you like the trailer or not. But the trailer shows for me in every way it's presented, the way the narration works, the way they designed the trailer itself, the way they show the shots that are in the trailer. Everything about the trailer screams to me, "We're not the prequels! We're not the prequels!" Seriously. Everything about it is talking about how they're trying for a more classical style in the approach to it. And it is worth noting that the directors, plural, involved in this movie do actually, in my opinion at least, have the talent to pull that kind of thing off as long as they're directly going for it. And Lord knows they have to understand how much pressure there is on this movie. All things considered, right? So, yeah. It's also worth noting that they're definitely going with a adaptation approach to things. In other words, we're not just having the exact same thing as the original trilogy, but we're having things that are designed in a way that evoke the aesthetic of the original trilogy. Whether that's good or bad is, of course, going to depend on how it's approached, but the design style is very clearly, okay, let's take that and one-up that. And usually, if that's pulled off properly, I'm a huge fan of that. I've talked about this many times before. I've often said that one of the reasons I love StarCraft 2 so much is it's StarCraft +1. They took the good of StarCraft and they They polished it and added onto it. So it's this kind of thing that can work, especially in movies, and in books for that matter. But then, we add on to that the... excuse me. The CGI question. Now, the CGI Falcon was obviously CGI, right? But we know that they have a Falcon model, and we know that they have a Falcon set. The question here becomes whether that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just going to give my opinion on that, which is not whether it's good or bad, of course. For me, I like models, of course, being used in movies and shows and whatnot, but I'm also okay with CGI being used for ship stuff, as I've already described, especially when it comes to something that is high action or high activity, something that is very, very difficult, if not ridiculous, in order to actually pull off with models and whatnot. So if you're going to have CGI, that's okay. But the thing is, you can't just flop back and forth between the two so much, because then it'll be obvious, well, that's CGI, well, that's a model, because there's a difference, and you can tell, right? So what you have to do is you have to actually have consistency with it. So as long as they're consistent with the usage of CGI for the ships and whatnot, that'll be okay. But that being said, there were several things that I liked about the way, you know, the Falcon looked obviously CGI. Most of the other CGI on display did not look obviously CGI. It was CGI, but it wasn't obviously, and in that case, I am okay with that. Final thing I'm going to note is the lightsaber. Thing is, pretty much to date, in all the works, lightsabers are basically, well, I'm not going to get too much into it, you know, I actually have done a lot of sword fighting and whatnot in my life, but basically there's this particular manner of sword fighting which lightsabers have always been because of the way a lightsaber is constructed. If you think about it, you can do more with a lightsaber than you can do most real-life swords, because all that you have to really handle is the weight of the blade. And by the blade, I mean the handle. All you have to handle is the weight of the handle. That's why that sentence sounded weird in my head. So you can do more with that. It's much more acrobatic. There's much more movement. It tends to lean itself more towards... well, you know what? I don't want to get into it. It's more this style and this style than it is other kinds of sword fighting. Now, that by contrast, for those of you who know real sword fighting, if you're fighting a guy with a broadsword and you also have a broadsword, that's not really a sword fight per se. That's more like... whoever manages to hit the other guy first is probably going to win that fight. Because a sword is an incredibly damaging weapon. And, of course, there's stuff you can do with that, you know, the lock into the guard and the reverse inlet method. There's all sorts of sword fighting techniques for that. But the point is, it is a completely different mind of thought compared to what is usually used for lightsabers, which involves no handguard there. So... I'm not really opposed to the idea of a lightsaber that's of a more classic European-style sword. It's just interesting to me because that's going to involve a completely different fighting style, a completely different saber style, which I can't help but read into, because they may be doing that on purpose to indicate that the old style has basically died out, especially since the extended universe doesn't exist within the confines of this movie, and therefore... it's possible that it was, you know, Luke, for example, could have literally said, okay, you know, the old style obviously wasn't working and we need to determine new ways to fight, and so this is now something that could actually be commonplace. Of course, it could also just be, that's a unique lightsaber. I mean, don't forget, I think it's Exar Kun, or I can't remember the right one, but it's the one who had the multiple lengths lightsaber, and then there's the one that actually does the multiple blades coming out, there's the one that comes out both sides, you know, etc. So there's plenty of options for that, and those are my thoughts on the trailer, and now I'm going to stop talking about the trailer and get back to the game.